So now that we have this huge stub of code, right? We have working code here. I want to help you guys to, I want to discuss how do we convert this into an interesting program? Okay, so I just tried to convert this into an interesting program. I'm going to talk you through it, but you can follow along with me. So what I want to do is, I want to create a program. You can just read this part here. So the first thing I think, okay, so before I go to creating the program, the first thing is it would be nice to create a function, or at least that's how I am thinking. It's nice to create a function, time to walk across any country, right? And in order to find the answer to this question, how long will it take me to walk across any country? What are the inputs that I need? Well, of course, I need to know what is the size of the country, but I'm going to write some clever logic to figure that out, right? Then I need to know the width of the country. So in this case, I'm taking that as an input. Then I'm going to take the step size, and then how many hours per day you want to walk. That's a very flexible function. If I have this function, I can use it in many different settings. So the first thing I want to do is to create a function that kind of looks like this. And then to make a program, what we will do is we can prompt the user. You guys saw how the input is working. So you prompt the user to enter the name of the country, then the width of the country, and the size of a step. So these three parameters, we can use the input function and get input from the user. And then we can tell the user, hey, you've given me these three pieces of information. Now I will compute for you how long it will take for you to walk across your favorite country. So let's just see all this in action. So the important ingredient here is we already covered this first part, right? I mean, actually, at least this first part we covered. So the last piece that I need to show you is I created a new function now called time to walk across the country. And it takes the width, it takes the step size, and it takes the walking hours per day, right? And then it does, basically I've taken all of the calculation we have done and I've put it into this function, and this function will return the number of days. So basically converted all of the code that was not in the previous solution inside a function. Now I have only functions. There's no code right now above this that's outside a function. Okay, so now when I come to write my program, the first thing I have to do is to say, again, it's a beautiful way to think about writing programs. Separate the idea of what is my interaction with the user from what is the logic that I need in my code. So here, all my user interactions are here. So the first thing I do is I say input, and I say, please enter the name of the country, just so I know which country it is. Then I say, can you please enter the width of the country? So there's a little interesting thing here where I put out this word, this function float here. In the second half of this section, I'm going to explain that to you. So for now, we won't focus on it, pretend it's not there, okay? And yeah, I'll explain this in detail. So don't worry about it. The most important thing to focus on now is the input. So each time I write an input, I have to write a clear message so that the user can actually know what to put in. So the first input is please enter the name of the country, right? And you should choose your own input messages. Again, it's a very important skill. How can I write a clear message so the user does not get confused? Okay, and then whatever he enters, I can use precisely without making mistakes. So the next thing is enter the width of the country. You see, I said I want it in miles, right? And that's important because if you don't specify the unit, he might enter it in kilometers and then we will be off in our calculations. Later, you can make more flexible programs where you can give the user the choice. You want to enter it in miles or in kilometers, and then take the input and so on. So these inputs, these user interfaces can be very complicated, right? But for now, we'll make simple ones just to get a flavor and write complete programs. The next one is the step size. So you say, please enter the average size of a step you take. And then I want to know how many hours a day you want to walk, right? And once I get these parameters, you see the entire program now is very interesting, right? After the input is done, the entire program is only one line because all I have to do is to call the time to walk across country function and pass in the three parameters, which is beautiful to me, right? Because all of the complexity is gone away. My program is one line. So that's a beautiful end point in your programming. Every time you write a function, if you end up with one clean function that you can call to run your whole program, that means you have written a very nicely organized program, right? It's very simple. I could have put this in a separate file. Later we'll look at separate files, and it's very simple. There's a user interface with a few questions to the user and one function call, right? And if you write code like this, usually it's easy to debug and work with as well. So if you run this now, you see it will prompt you. So why don't I, rather than me running it, why don't you guys run it and make sure that it actually works? All right. I saw Vikas raised his hand. Can you please tell again about float? Yes. Okay, so I am going to explain float. Just right as soon as we finish the function section, I'm going to spend quite a few minutes talking about this. Okay, so it takes a few minutes to explain it, so I won't rush in there. Right now, I just want you guys to just look at all the functions and run the code once, right? And make sure that you can run it. Later in the quiz, I've asked you to actually run this for a specific country and so on. But make sure you're familiar with it so you can do that quiz pretty easily. Code is working, Akash says. That's great. Vikas has a question. Yes, Vikas.
So I just have two questions. My first question is that when we are defining a constant or the variable here,
yes,
function. So
yes.
Is it that it gets saved and we can use that function in any of the command later on we are running, or is it something kind of temporary that on the current worksheet it only we can access?
Okay, so you're talking about any function, right? Any function. Yeah. So for example, this function I highlighted, right? Milestone. Yes. Okay, so the idea is the following. Right now, because I've given you something that is embedded in the browser, you see that I have this main.py. So our code in a real world scenario will live in multiple files. Okay, there's a bigger topic about where things will be visible in a big program. Okay, Python will control the visibility and the accessibility in a very specific way. It's a little abstract and advanced, so I'm just going to hint at it right now, but it will answer your question. So first thing is, you see, I can create multiple files. You can just hit the plus button here. It'll allow me to create multiple files, right? So I could create a file, test.py. Okay. Later, I'll show you how can I access code that's written in multiple files. How can I access them from one file called another file? But first, today, let's just talk about all my code living in one file. That's the simplest case, right? So if you put all your code in one file, then all the functions that are defined in that file will be available to you, right? So if I wrote another program below this and so on, then it will be visible. As soon as the def command is given to Python, it will be visible in that entire Python session. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is some, sorry, let me just make one more fine point, okay? It's a detailed point. I just want to keep it at the back of your head. Right now, we're going to work in single files, so it won't make any complexity. The moment you go to multiple files, Python says, hey, you're going to get confused if you have all these files all over the place. So I'm going to put some more restrictions as who can call what. And I'll explain those restrictions in detail. But for right now, as soon as you run this file, all the functions will be available. Yeah, next question.
My next question is that suppose in the same file also, if I'm using too many functions,
yes.
So and suppose I have forgotten what function I have defined earlier, and yes. Do I need to? It's always that do I need to scroll up or down to look what functions I did?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Of course, I'm going to make two important comments, right? First comment is, as a designer of a program, you must have these function map in your mind, because that's the behavior we want to manipulate, right? Otherwise, you will recreate the same function again and again because you need to know them. So usually you work with some kind of piece of paper or design sheet or something, and you write down the function scheme so that you can remember them. That's just for you to remember and access stuff. As far as writing stuff is concerned, it is this editors and good editors. This guy is in a browser, so sometimes he can be flaky. But if I start writing, you see, as soon as I said DIS, it gives me help, right? And it shows me what parameters it takes and so on. So again, remember how we talked about after you've written a function, you should always focus only on the name and the interface. And this little help that the editor is giving gives me the name and the interface. It doesn't tell me what's returned, but it definitely tells me what goes in, right? And then if you really need to look at the function, then you have to scroll up and look at it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, it is important to keep certain things in your mind. I will make an important comment to you guys because it's a live comment right now. This is one of the reasons why in programming we say programmer is working on something. In his mind, he has loaded up, at least in temporary memory in his mind, he has, I don't know, 20, 50, 100 functions. Lot of ideas are in his head at the moment, right? That he's just created things that I want to call this, I want to do that, I want to do that. If he gets a phone call or an email or an Instagram or a Facebook, anything, the moment he switches context, all of that goes away from his head. So for him to write the next line of code, if he comes back, it'll take him 10 minutes to start up again. Where was I? What do I remember? Oh, I have written these 4 functions. I need to go anywhere. So you see, programming has taught the world, and a lot of programmers know this now, that you have to do concentrated work, right? Interruptions are expensive. Multitasking is a myth. People think I can do 4 things at the same time. But if you're doing this kind of stuff, you can see why there's a strain on our memory, right? To not memorize things, but to remember the context we're working in. So it's a very important life tip, right? Whenever we work on anything meaningful, it should be total concentration. Work for 10 minutes, and then you can go and do your email or phones or whatever, right? Then work for another 10 minutes. Whether it's 10 or 20 minutes of concentrated time or even half an hour, work in concentrated bursts. Anyway, that's just a life tip. Any other question? There's a lovely questions, Vikas. Please keep them coming. Everyone, please keep your questions coming. This is, yeah, I would love to talk less. I have to talk because I want to transfer the information, but it's more about making sure that all your thoughts are addressed. So I will take another question if you have. We covered a very important piece of code right now. We should have done a poll for this, Manish.
Yeah, let me ask someone. Let's see.
It's kind of hard. Cassandra, that's wonderful. Cassandra, maybe I can ask you, since you texted that so quickly, what part is hard, Cassandra? Does it just feel abstract, new, and
Let me unmute Cassandra.
Okay. I think I'm following. I'm just imagining it would be hard to come up with all of it myself, you know, like how to do the steps and the functions and everything.
Yes. So I want to tell you this, right? Especially me, I don't want you to feel that, oh, I don't have the skill for this, because, you know, I have been trained as a scientist and a mathematician for so many years. This stuff comes naturally to me. Plus, I've been a programmer for many, many years, right? So when you see me doing all this stuff and it looks easy, you shouldn't feel like, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. Everybody will be able to do that. It's just, it's slightly a new language, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, and this is, but once you see it, you see the potential beauty of this.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yes, it's very beautiful, right? You see the structure emerge in your thoughts. Normally, we don't componentize our thoughts. When we write stuff, we organize in paragraphs and so on, but this is much more structure, right? So, and this is why I said practice is important, because it's all about you, right? So yeah, do take the time, do think and interact. Come back to me and say what was difficult, what was easy. We will talk more about it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that input. Very helpful to me too. I see a couple of chats. I'm just going to say, Subhash said, need to play around with these tricks during practice hours. I think that's correct, Subhash. I'm glad you find it interesting, right? A lot of people, many instructors I've talked to, do not introduce this kind of thinking to people. In fact, many books are written, they don't emphasize these kind of structural thinking. They teach you how to write each line, what's an integer, what's a float, and they move on. But then that doesn't make you a strong programmer, right? These ideas will make you powerful programmers. So, but of course, powerful ideas need a little time, so make sure you have time to practice. And I think Akash said relatively simple when compared to other languages like C and Java. Still, a new language takes time to learn. Maybe Manish, if you can ask Akash, I want to ask Akash, why do you say it's relatively simple compared to C and Java? What strikes you? Yes. Do you see anything structural? So Manish says Akash says I've worked in C and Java before. So what structure, do you see anything structural, Akash, other than the fact that it's cleaner, less parentheses and commas and syntax and structure? Exactly. So hopefully Akash will be a person who can give us his own experiences comparing to other languages, right? Yeah, the syntax and structure are relatively simple in Python. So I want to stress this for you guys. There are some other languages, if you get time, I will show you, which have maybe mildly cleaner syntax. It's hard to imagine how can we make it cleaner than Python, simpler than Python. But Python is almost English, right? There's very little commas, brackets, some stuff to distract us. This little semicolon is there and this indentation is there. you are going to start feeling the indentation is very natural. I remember the first time I did Python, I was like, oh, I'm used to writing brackets. So usually, just to help you guys to understand, the start and end of functions in other languages will require you to put braces like this, right? Put parentheses. As soon as you finish a function, you have to put parentheses like this. And that became so natural to many people. But when you came to Python, they said parentheses are not needed. And you're like, well, how do I know when the function is over? And they say, oh, well, you have to indent it. And so it takes a little time to get used to this indentation idea. But once you see the indentation idea, it's natural. It seems like your eyes get used to it and everything seems to flow nicely, right? You have less distraction of the parentheses and the function is organized by indentation. So it's very English-like, everything feels like reading. So it's a very terse language, right? And that's why I said the names are important. Because if the names are good, you can read it like a sentence, right? Say, for example, I'll read this sentence. Compute the width of a country in feet by calling the function miles to feet and giving it the width. That reads almost like a sentence. Amit asked the question, good question. Can a function be without return? The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I think I gave an example right before. Later I will show maybe other examples. The short answer is yes. You don't need to return anything. However, we have to ask the question, if a function doesn't return anything, what use is that function? It's the programmer's equivalent of, in logic, there's a question, if a tree fell in the forest and nobody saw it, did it really fall, right? And so if a function was called and it didn't return anything, did it really run, right? And the answer is, yes, it ran, but why is that function useful? The only way it can be useful if it goes and does something strange like print out to the console or something, right? So if it goes and prints to the console, then this function is useful even though it doesn't return stuff, right? So if it has these things like printing to the console from a function are called side effects. Again, it's a big topic and we will talk about it at some other point. Side effects are something we will do in the beginning casually. Later we will say it's really not nice for functions to go off on the side and make side effects. It's better for functions to have specific call and return semantics, right? I call you with something and you return something to me. Then the function is not allowed to go off in a corner and call a web page or go to some side and print to console or write to a file. Whenever we do those side effects, we have to be very clear in our mind what we're doing. And we'll talk about side effect based programming at some later point. Okay, but for now, Vikas asks, how is return different than print? Okay, so this is important, right? So let me do it this way. I'm going to just write some code here, and I'm not going to I'm going to comment out just to use this same file and not change anything. I'm just going to comment out the inputs, so it's not going to input anything, and I'm not going to run the print statement. Okay, so if I run this code right now, it does nothing, and I'll answer your questions here. So you see, okay, I have a place where I can work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to def a function, right? And we'll def the function, and we'll use the double that we had before. Right, so we say double n, right? And we're going to basically here, instead of returning something, I'm going to, let me start with return. That's probably the best way. So if I return 2 times n, this is a function we have seen before. Now the point is this, if I just say double n, then even though I run this function, nothing is going to happen. So I shouldn't say n, double 2. Nothing happens, right? The only way, but it's returned a value. In fact, if I want to see the return value, I have to put, let's call it return value for now, right? I can get the return value, but I still don't see anything, right? It's stored inside return value, but I don't see it. But now I can print the return value, right? And now I will see that this function is computed, returned a value, and then we print it. Now, that means that I actually have a contract with this function to do the doubling function. And in my main program, I'm getting the result of that computation, right? Suppose instead of return here, if I did nothing, right? Let's say, let's try it like this. Return is optional. If I did nothing, then nothing comes back and I get none, which is a Python keyword to say there's no value. Nothing comes back. So this is not good either. So now we can do what I talked about. I can go in here and I can say print. So now this function has a double duty, right? It has 2 duties. Its duty 1 is compute the double of the number, and duty 2 is to print the number 2. So in that case, if I do this, let's see what happens. You see so let me turn off this print statement. So you see what happened. Of course, it printed out 4 because as soon as this function double is called, it went here and it ran the print statement. So it printed out 4. There's nothing to return. So actually return value is blank. And that's why if I run this code now, it has a none printed out, right? So it's a style question, right? When you design a function, the important concept I will start mentioning now, but slowly becomes clear is, it's always nice when a function has one responsibility. Then we don't get confused of multiple responsibilities, right? So the one responsibility of this function is to double the number. But if I put print in there, it has 2 responsibilities. So it's called double and print. So you can write code like that. There's nothing in Python that will complain, right? But then I would rather you be explicit and you write a function called double and print, right? And now you have to use the double and print function, and it's clear to you what you're trying to do. So there's no errors in this program if I run this, but there is a structural thing that I want you to understand. It is a kind of single responsibility. It's always nice when functions are doing one thing. So let me give you a final statement and then I will stop this discussion. Imagine that we want to write another program where I don't want to print the result of double. I want to take double and I want to put it in another calculation. And you're going to see this in a moment. Then if I just printed it out and I didn't return anything, then I can't continue to use the value coming back, which would break my programs, right? So double and print is also less usable. Less usable means I cannot use it in a function, in a program where I need the return value to do the next calculation. Because it's already printed out, I don't get a return value, okay? So it's a great question. I want you guys, of course, to think about this. When do I need to return a value and when can I print it? I gave you some clues now, and when you think about it, it will become much more clear.